with Swami. But I hope you appreciate what Shekhar is doing here with the Sanskrit and with the Vedas. There's something called primordial sound, which one time before God became manifest, God was like, we would think of it as the void or the emptiness of just pure consciousness. And when God decided to come forth into being, one of the first things that came forth was the Sanskrit alphabet. And if you don't believe me, I'd like you to observe something, that how many parents told their children to call them Ma or Pa? Like, I have a daughter, she's now 28. I was very excited when one day I looked down at her and she said, Pa, Pa, Pa. I never taught her to say that. And then a few months later, it wasn't like she even called her mother, it was just sounds that came out. Ma, Pa, things like that. They never went to school to learn to say that. It's just a primordial sound. In every country of the world, the babies call their parents the same thing, Ma and Pa, and they didn't go to school. That's because it's a program, like when you get a computer, Windows 10 is installed or something, or iOS is already pre-installed in it. So when you were born, there's sort of an operating system pre-installed in your consciousness, and that contains Sanskrit, the Sanskrit sounds. I noticed the other day I got a splinter in my finger, and I went, ow. Nobody taught me to say ow, but that's one of the Sanskrit vowels, right? A, I, U, A, I, O, ow, ah. Just a second here. What do you want to say? Yeah.
Questions later.
Questions later.
And then when you're trying to solve a problem, sometimes you go, or And then we just had a great lunch, and I went, that tastes good. That's the Sanskrit right there. So these sounds, nobody taught us to say these. And I remember when I was a little boy and I had a toy truck, I'd go rum, 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 rum. Well, I heard Neem Karoli Baba doing the same thing. He'd go om, rum, 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 rum. That's a primordial sound, Ram. What do you say, Ram, Rama? But he chanted om, ram, 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 ram. When I was 5 years old, I did the same thing. I'd go with my little truck, rum, 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 rum. So these are not just curiosities. These are aspects of consciousness. So every sound has an aspect of consciousness, and every aspect of consciousness can be represented as a sound. So when you chant these sounds, it's stimulating a part of your mind that opens up a spiritual awareness. So it's very, very special when you chant. I do a lot of mantra chanting in Sanskrit, and there's some of these mantras that awaken these aspects of consciousness. Some of them associated more with the male deities, some more with the female deities, some with the planets, and so on. These are all aspects of consciousness and awareness. So in Shekhar, having you chant these, it's stimulating an area of consciousness, not only for you, but this consciousness goes out to the whole planet. Like, you're actually, each of you, an antenna, or I like to think of it as kind of like a Wi-Fi router transmitting out. So all of our consciousness is linked with everybody on the planet. So when you sit here and you just go Om, that's being transmitted to everyone on the planet, So it's a great service that you're doing. And I think it was Jesus who said, "You are the salt of the earth." And if the salt loses its saltiness, how are you going to salt your food? So we all like a little salt in our food, but what if the salt goes flat? And so it doesn't taste good anymore. Well, Jesus was saying that the Jews were the salt of the earth because they had this certain consciousness of God. But what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of these so-called Jewish teachings came from India. And even Aristotle said the Jews came from India. And there are a lot of things that I've learned about this, that the word Jew in Hebrew is Yehuda. Who were the Yehudas in India? That was the tribe of Krishna. So there's a part of Israel called Judea. Its original pronunciation is Yehuda. So has anybody here been to Dwarka? It's a northwest part of India. There's a place now, it's the new Dwarka, but the old Dwarka is underwater because that part of the coast fell into the ocean. Well, this was the dwelling place of Krishna, I believe, and when that catastrophe happened, many of those people went to the west and migrated across the ocean into what's now Yemen, and then further north. There's a trade route that goes from India to Yemen, where the spices from India were traded there. Then they eventually went north into what's now Israel. There was one of the great, it's very appropriate to talk about this now as we're close to Christmas. You know, the real origins of Christianity were really in India. In fact, Christianity existed before Christ. This is very, very interesting. If you take the word Christ, it comes from the Greek, Christos. Where did the Greeks get that? It comes from the root Krishna. Now I studied, my first guru was really Ramamurti Mishra, who was a Sanskrit scholar. He said the word Krishna, the root is Krish, right? And then na is not, so he said Krishna means that which cannot be crushed. What is that? The light within you cannot be crushed. So Krishna stressed the light in your heart is indestructible. It's pre-existing consciousness. So as these people migrated to the west into what's now called the Holy Land, they brought this awareness of that Krishna principle within them. And then later, under Emperor Constantine, he wanted to come up with a religion to unify the East and the West. So he started to bring these teachings, what he called Christianity. But actually, you could call it Krishnaism, or that might even be Vaishnavism, I don't know. So these teachings are primordial in every religion around the world. The connections between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, so on, they are universal aspects of consciousness. So when you are chanting in Sanskrit, you are actually like getting saltier in a sense, like you are regenerating the spirit within you, and it's that spirit that goes out. So the story was actually that the Jews were not to have their own country. They were supposed to be, like originally they were supposed to be wanderers and just spread out among humanity. And Jesus used the parable of the yeast in the bread. You are the leaven, the yeast, that makes the bread rise and makes it into a loaf of bread. And it's the same with, I think, with the people from India are like that leaven in the bread to migrate across the face of the earth and impart this consciousness wherever you go. You don't have to stop people on the street or knock on their door and tell them, hey, I want to tell you about this. Just being who you are, doing your sadhana, your inner sadhana, is a great gift to humanity, you know. So that's kind of my little sermon here. But it's very inspiring to hear the chanting because it awakens that. Even though I don't understand the meaning of a lot of the words that you're chanting, I feel the consciousness behind it. And it's very stimulating and awakening. It awakens parts of your consciousness. So I'd like to thank you, Sheikha, for keeping that alive, you know. So some of you guys had questions? This young man, you had a question? You forgot it?
Not exactly a question, it's kind of a statement, but I actually learned the Sanskritam you were talking about. I actually learned it, and like there's this thing, what you were saying first, it's like called it's called Urchalu. They call it Urchalu, and then there's another one that's called Halloween. So like there's those.
Okay,
I guess
so
it's called
well, that's very interesting. He has some personal experiences of this, which maybe some other time we can get into hearing those stories. You know. So you may wonder how I happen to be a Baba devotee, you know, and or how I even got into this spiritual path at all. I was raised in New York, and my family were atheists, really. And I really didn't believe in anything. I was an engineering student and didn't really believe in God at all till I was in my 20s. And then I dropped out of engineering school and actually became a poet. And what I experienced when I got very inspired, light, I would see light. And I always heard that thing, have you seen the light? You know, and I said, yeah, I think I have seen the light, but I don't know what it is. You know, where does it come from? And how can I get it to come, you know, not just when I'm inspired to write a poem, but I would like to get that light to be there all the time, you know? So then I started doing Hatha Yoga. I just started to do it for my health. But right away from the very beginning, you know, people were saying, well, the Hatha Yoga class was 11 o'clock, like Sunday morning. And I think I better have a big breakfast first because I don't want to be hungry and run out of energy, you know. But then the yoga teacher said, no, don't eat anything before yoga class. And I thought, gee, I might pass out or something. But I started doing the Hatha Yoga, and right from the very first asana, I started feeling energy going through me. And I said, wow, there's that light again, and there's that energy. And I said that really, I experienced that there's a physical body, and then there's a light body. So I had that experience just doing Hatha Yoga. I went right out to a bookstore, and I said, what is your best book on yoga? And they said, well, we have this book about this guy, Ramakrishna, in India. I think the first book I read was the Vivekananda, was a book about Vivekananda. That, of course, took me to Ramakrishna. Right away, I got very excited. I said, something is speaking to my soul here. So then one day, I was reading all about Ramakrishna, the great saint they called the God-man of India, you know, and then one day I was listening, there was this American professor, Ramdas, you know, but his name before that was Professor Alpert, Richard Alpert. And he had these experiences taking LSD of higher consciousness, you know. But he thought, I wonder if there's a way to get this consciousness naturally without the drugs. So someone said you should go to India. So he went to India and he wandered around looking for people that could tell him how to get this light and consciousness naturally. And he was taken up into the mountains in the foothills of the Himalayas, like around Nainital, and he met this old man in a blanket. He's called Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli Baba knew all about him, could even tell him the dream he had the night before about his mother that had died, knew what his mother had died from, and knew all about him, all his eccentricities. And what amazed Ram Dass, that was the name that Neem Karoli Baba gave him, we called him Ram Dass. And what amazed him was that this man in the blanket knew all about him, knew all of the bad things about him, the bad, his bad temper and so on, and all these things, but he still loved him. There was this unconditional love. So he came back to the US eventually, and I heard him interviewed on the radio. And so one day I was sitting in my apartment in New York City listening to this interview, and it was like, I wondered, is there some guru for me? I thought, it happened to this guy Ram Dass, maybe there's somebody over there who is aware of me and can help me also. And at that moment, like a ball of light hit my Ajna chakra, just hit me in the middle of the forehead. And I felt this little wave of bliss, And that did it. Then I bought a ticket to go to India. Well, actually, I bought a ticket to go to England, and then I hitchhiked from England through Europe, took buses, long story. Took me a month to get to India. I mean, I think the last stop was, I was in Kabul, Afghanistan, and then the war broke out with Pakistan. I wanted to always go through the Khyber Pass, but the people that went that way were trapped there for like a month. So I flew from Kabul to Delhi, and that was really the beginning of my quest. I was just very, very graciously treated by the Indian people. I had very funny experiences though, because my first day, I was in Connaught Circle in the middle of Delhi, and 3 or 4 young guys came up to me. They were about, 17, 18 years old, and they said, what are you doing in India? And I said, well, I'm looking for a guru. And they laughed at me and said, oh, that's ridiculous. That's a superstition. We're going to be engineering students, we're going to America, we're going to study computer programming and things like that. They said, you're wasting your time here looking for gurus, that's old stuff. Nobody believes in that anymore, So that happened to me quite a few times,
So they came here and you went there.
That's right, we switched. That's right. It's very funny because when I first went to Mount Shasta, I went to India. When I came back, I was wearing my white kurta and my, looked like pajamas, the pants, and I had big Rudraksha mala and lots of long hair, down my back. And there were signs in the windows of the stores that said, no hippies allowed. I never thought of myself as a hippie, but other people looked at me and they said, there's a hippie, So, and but the funny thing is now, I found that they called us, the old families in Mount Shasta, the old Italian families, it was a farming community, a lot of old Italian people, they called us the white robers, because we wear these white robes, And yeah, so the funny thing is now, the grandchildren of those people are coming to me asking for meditation instruction. So it's very funny. Anyway, I traveled around India for a while. I was basically like a sadhu. I didn't take the vow, the sannyas vow, But I think I wandered around India 6 months on about $700 that lasted the whole time. So there were then 8 rupees to the dollar. So anyway, but I just lived very humbly. I traveled 3rd class and so on. And one day I was sitting in Rishikesh, and some people came to me and they said, our guru told us to come find you. He said, there's somebody down in the middle of town sitting by this temple. Go find him, bring him here. Well, I had been then in India about a month, and I was not used to the spicy food, you know. And I had been craving, I used to have a farm in the country. One of my favorite meals was to go in the garden and pick some fresh spinach, you know. And then I would just steam it very lightly so it was hot, and then put melted butter on it. And then I would like make kind of, you know, some kind of like a chapati, something like that. And I was just dreaming of having that spinach, you know, but there was no place. I go into a restaurant in India and they say, oh, we have sag paneer or something, but it's all like cooked to a pulp, you know, and has lots of spices and things like that. I mean, it was very delicious, but it wasn't what my body was craving, this fresh spinach, you know. So I get taken to this yogi. He's sitting on the side of the Ganges above the town of Rishikesh, just wearing a cloth, you know, and he doesn't even have a fire, and there's nobody else around. These people that took me to see him, they just dropped me off there and they left. So I'm sitting there on the rock, you know, with this guy, wondering what am I doing here? And he put his hand behind his back like this, and he brought out this stainless steel container full of steamed spinach. And it had ghee on it, you know, and then there was the toasted chapati there also with ghee on it, you know. And he just handed it to me, and I said, where did you get that? There's no fire here, and it's warm, you know. And then I thought, well, he was going to eat too, but he told me he didn't eat. He just said, you eat, you know. So I was very grateful for the spinach, but he knew absolutely what it was that I wanted and made it for me like that, you know. So Swami's not the only person who could do these miracles like that. So then I thought, well, this must be my guru, you know. So after I finished the spinach, I was waiting for him to teach me something, you know. Like, that would be a nice trick to know how to precipitate food, things like that, you know. So, or teach me anything, teach me a mantra, you know, what is the meaning of life, what is my destiny, things like that. But he didn't speak at all, completely like what it said, Moni Baba. And then I fell asleep. I don't know what happened. I just fell asleep. And I woke up an hour later, and he was looking at me. Now it's starting to get dark, you know, and I'm thinking, I don't want to spend the night out here, you know, on the rock, sleep on the rock or something. And so I finally got up and I bowed, said namaste, and I left, you know. And I thought that was very strange because I was sure he must be my guru, but he didn't teach me anything. Then it was what was a couple of years later, well, no, actually it was later on this trip that I went to see Neem Karoli Baba. And he also hardly talked to me. The only thing, he said two things to me. One was, who are you? And I thought, what do you mean? I sat for like a month there, and I couldn't get into this whole, you know, devotional thing where you're like, there was some young girls in the front row would massage his feet and stuff like that, and people offering him candy and fruit, and it was a very devotional path, you know. And I did not grow up with that kind of upbringing. I just didn't understand it at all. So I sat at the back of the room just kind of watching what was going on. Although he did have us chant bhajans, you know, mostly things like Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram by the hour, you know. And I did start to experience some bliss from that, you know. But I thought, this is like very funny. This, you know, I'd been studying aerospace engineering at the university, you know, a few years before, and now here I am standing, you know, with this old guy in a blanket chanting Shri Ram, Jai Ram. I had no idea what I was doing, you know. But then sometimes these waves of bliss would come through me, and I go, oh, that's really something happening there, you know. And the other thing he said to me was, this was toward the end of my stay. It was like a 6-month trip to India that I was traveling around. And he said, I went up to him and I started thinking, it's probably he's not my guru, So I saw him alone. I went up to him and usually there was some Indian devotees that were sort of guarding him, but somehow they were all up someplace else. So I went up and I said, okay, who's my guru? And he looked at me, he started shaking his fist, and he said, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. First I thought he was swearing at me. Then I realized he actually meant Jesus was my guru. And I thought, I grew up, I was actually raised in a Presbyterian church, Christian church. And I didn't come all the way to India to be told that Jesus was my guru. I went to church and I prayed to Jesus. I never had any kind of experiences with him, So I was a little disappointed in that, And the funny thing is, just about a month ago, I haven't seen Inkroli Baba left his body in, let's see, what was that? That was 1973 or 74, I guess, around there, 74. Yeah, Steve Jobs missed him, and Mark Zuckerberg, they missed him. We might have very different computers now if they had seen him. Yeah, so. So about a month ago, the people who read my books, they'll sometimes come visit me, and this woman started staring at me very strangely about a month ago, and I said, "What are you looking at?" She said, "There's this fat old guy in a blanket sitting in your chair." And I said, "Well, what's his name?" She said, "I don't know." So I had a picture of Inkroli Baba. She says, "That's him. He's sitting in your chair." I mean, I was sitting in the chair, but she said, "I didn't see you. I saw him there." And I thought, oh, this woman, is she, eating mushrooms or something like this? I don't know. But then another person had the same experience. And then, about a week after that, I was praying to know what's going on. Then that night, it was just before my birthday, I had a dream, and there was Neem Karoli Baba, and just like he was when I was there with him, wearing the blanket. And I frequently think about leaving my body, that I've been here in samsara too long, that I want to go to Vaikuntha, I want to go to the higher worlds where everybody's in Satchitananda, So, but he said, I want you to stay here, stay in your body. So I said, that's pretty clear. Then he gave me a hug, which he never did before, and I really felt his love. I was always a little scared of him because the last time I saw him, it was in Vrindavan, and I had a private interview with him. He offered me chai, and in those days they served the chai in these little clay cups. And this cup had a round bottom. You couldn't put it down, but it had a leak in it. And it was dripping on me, and it was burning me. So I tried to put it on the ground, and I tried to hold it with 2 fingers so it wouldn't fall over. And this is the kind of thing a real guru does, like you always want the fantastic miracles of samadhi or something like that. But sometimes the guru makes you suffer a little too, So he kept saying, drink your tea. And I said, I can't drink it, it's burning me, And so I don't know what, half of it spilled, some of it spilled on the front of my kurta, and I burnt my tongue. It was very, And then he said, what do you want anyway? He was kind of like very sort of rude, not seem what I consider loving guru type thing. You know, I said, what do you want anyway? You know, so I said, well, you're the guru. You tell me what I want. And then he said, well, no, what do you want? And I heard he sent some people to Nainital. He sent people different places. So whenever I named a place, like Varanasi, or he said, yes, go there. Then I said, well, what about Nainital? Yes, go there. And I said, well, which one is it? You know? And I said, I just want to do what God wants. And he said, it's through the translator, he said, don't you understand? God wants what you want. It's God in you creating the desire. So you have to listen to your own heart and feel what God in you wants, you know? So that was kind of interesting. Then he said, Jao, you know, get out of here, you know? And I said, whoa, you know? So he couldn't walk by himself because, you know, many years of sitting in lotus meditating, I guess his knees were bad. He had to lean on people. So I left him there. He started to go out with the two attendants, and then they were going to show me out of the ashram, and there were two gates you go through with the iron doors, and they both were locked, you know. And they showed me out through these gates, and I got out to the street, and there he was sitting on a rock across the street. And I thought, how did he get out here so fast? I just left him in the room there, and he couldn't walk very well. And I was so confused by what was happening. Then on top of that, the sky turned black, and this like lightning started happening, and there was a tree right there, and in the tree were 12 peacocks. I've never seen, it's one of the most beautiful things. It's like a Christmas card, you know, the 12 peacocks and all this stuff. And a shaft of light came down out of this cloud, and it hit this tree with all the peacocks. It was like what is called a Satori experience, or just sudden awakening through the beauty of the experience that I was completely lost. I had no idea, like, who I was, where I was going. I just started sort of wandering around, and so I recognized him across the street. So I went up to him to ask him again what I should do, or where to go. How do I get home from here, you know? Because his place was out in the country. He picked up a big rock. There was a big rock like that next to the rock where he was sitting. And as I got close, he picked it back up like he was going to throw it at me, you know? So I said, whoa, this guy's really crazy, you know? So I went the other way. Then I got out to the main street. Somehow, the moment I left him, the blackness disappeared, the sky cleared up, got very bright, you know? Then I looked back at him, and he was waving at me. He's going like this, you know? And he had a big smile on his face. So this whole thing was like a joke to him. I mean, so the funny thing is, after, that was 50 years ago, that just like a few weeks ago, a month ago, he starts coming to me in a dream, and now he's like, seemed to be helping some of the people that come to see me, you know? And it's very interesting because I always feel like I'm supposed to say some great wisdom or give some secret mantra or, you know, some asana or, you know, some real hard sadhana to get people enlightened, you know? But Neem Karoli Baba, basically, his whole path was love people and feed them, you know? And that's something very easy. So it seems most people who come, they just sort of want reassurance that they're on the right path, you know? Because people seem like they're going to find their own way. If there's some type of asana, they're going to find that, or they're going to study whatever it is they need to know. But people need to feel their basic goodness. They need to feel the light in their heart, you know. So anyway, after this first trip to India, I was back on my farm in upstate New York. And one day, someone sent this picture of Sai Baba to my house. And he said he was directed to send this to me. And I took one look at it, And I said, oh man, who is this guy with the afro and everything? It's like Jimi Hendrix. So, and then there was a little note that said, millions of Indians worship this man. And I thought, I remember when I was in India, they would like worship anybody. That's what it seemed like, you know. So, but for sure, I'm not going back to India, you know, that's what I thought, you know. So I had this picture. The guy that sent this to me, his father, he and his father were there when Swami made the golden Krishna statue from the dry riverbed, you know. And he said Swami told him, send me the picture. So I put the picture down on a table and kind of for several weeks I ignored it. Then one day it was raining and I couldn't work outside. And I sat down and there was this picture and I picked it up, looked at it again. Suddenly, like the picture seemed to come to life, you know? And Swami did this little dance. And I went, wow, the picture moved, you know? And I felt this love like I had never felt before, just overwhelming love. And it took me a little while to calm down from this. Then he seemed like he stepped out of the picture into the room, like living. It was not like flesh and blood, but it was really more real. It was what I guess you'd call it the light body, you know. And but it was definitely Sai Baba and very, very powerful and tangible. And I was very skinny at that time because on the first trip to India, I drank out of the Ganges because I thought Neem Karoli Baba said I was supposed to do that, and I was making an effort to be a good devotee, you know. And I got very sick for about 2 years. But so it actually, through getting sick, I actually learned healing. You know, I studied homeopathy and natural healing, so it actually turned out to be a blessing in the end. But so I was very skinny though at this point, you know, like I weighed, I think 119 pounds. Now I weigh about 175 pounds. So, you know, I was just like the Buddha with the roots showing through there. You know? And so after Swami steps into the room, he said, you poor skinny boy, what you need is a stack of pancakes. He said flapjacks. So he waved his hand like this, and he made a big plate of pancakes covered with butter and maple syrup, you know, and it was like from my childhood, something I dreamed about, a big stack of pancakes with lots of butter and maple syrup. And he said, go on, eat it. So I ate this whole thing up, and it was more like the love that was in it. And that really healed, that was a beginning, you know, real healing from that. And then the last thing he said was, come and visit me. And I had been telling people I'm never going back to India. Of course, I've been now like 8 times or something. But so 2 weeks later, there I was in Puttaparthi. And as I walked up toward the mandir, there was Swami out on the balcony. He waved to me. And I thought he couldn't be waving to me, so I looked around. There was nobody behind me. Sure, that was the only time he did that. He waved to me up there. And then, you know, he didn't really give me a physical interview, but in my dreams at night, I would have dream darshan from him. And there are a lot of other stories I could tell, but I think, well, one of them is maybe the kids would like this. There were no buildings then for the Westerners to stay in, really for anybody except the VIPs, you know. So they had these buildings that were called the sheds. That later they became big dormitories, but it was just a roof and no walls, but just posts, and then the floor was sand. So you would take your little mat, straw mat, and you sort of stake out your little place there, and you put your food into a big pottery bowl, and you put it there. And they said, you have to get a big stick because at night these dogs come in and try to steal your food. And these dogs were not like the dogs in Sacramento. You know, they were like mangy, they had wounds on them, and some of them were rabid. You know, if you got bit by one, it was really bad, you know. So you have to sleep with a stick there, and if a dog comes in, you're supposed to beat the dog. That's what they said, chase the dog out, because it's trying to steal your food that you have right there. So one night I woke up, I had my stick there, you know. One night I woke up, and you were like, there was another person 2 feet away from you on either side, you know. It was just bodies everywhere. So one night I woke up and I was in a state of complete bliss, that my whole body was lit up, like there was a light in every cell of my body. And I went, whoa, what is going on? And I felt some pressure on my heart, and I looked down and there was a dog with his head right against my heart, and his eyes were looking right up into my eyes, and for just, you know, and it was, his whole body was right up against my body, and you know, it took me a few seconds to realize what was going on, but you know, the light inside of me was so beautiful, I didn't want to move, but finally my mind clicked in, you know, my human brain, and I thought, oh, and I looked down, and the body was filled with wounds. It was just no hair on it. It was all just raw, you know, red skin and bleeding and stuff like that, you know. So then my mind kicked in and said, this is one of these rabid dogs that I'm supposed to protect myself from. So I jumped up, I picked up the stick, and I raised the stick over my head to hit the dog. And the dog looked up at me, like just for a minute, like that. First of all, these eyes were not like any eyes that I've seen in any dog, you know. Well, the moment I raised the stick, the light in my body went out. And then the dog ran away. I never hit the dog, I put it down. But then I said, oh, that's what happened. The light went out and the bliss went out, you know, so I went back to sleep. Then the next day, I was sitting on the wall there, and I was thinking about this experience, and somebody came up and sat down next to me and said, what are you thinking about? You look like you're very deep in thought. And so I think before I even told them what had happened, this person said, I was just reading this book by this woman who was a Swami devotee, and she said she baked some sweets to take to Swami, and then she put them on the windowsill to let them cool. And a big black dog came along and ate them. And she went out and she beat the dog with a stick. And the next day she went to see Swami and she said, Swami, I'm so sorry I made these sweets for you. And then he said, yes, and when I came to eat them, why did you beat me? And he picked up his robe, and he was black and blue there. And then she felt terrible. She realized the dog had been Swami, and she had hit him with a stick. So then I realized that had been Swami, and when those eyes were so amazing. So again, that was another beautiful lesson from Swami, that he could come in any form, you know. So I think that the last story I may tell you was that after Swami left his body in, 2011, in around Easter, he actually told me beforehand he was going to leave his body. He said he was going around the world asking his devotees for permission to leave, that he could be of more service out of the body, not having to run the ashram and things like that. So I was expecting that to happen, and I was sort of accepting that was going to happen, and I thought, well, it doesn't matter because the interconnection with Swami is there. So it doesn't matter if the physical body is there or not. So, but then after he had left the body, I really started missing him. At least before, I knew I could always get on a plane and go there and see him, you know. And so now I was missing that he wasn't on the earth in a physical body. And one day I heard him say, "Go for a walk." And I live in a subdivision. There's only one entrance to where you can drive in. This is where I used to live. And he said, "Go for a walk." So I was walking down the middle of the street, and this black BMW sports car pulls in. It's also, the reason it's black is a whole other reason, that black is like my least favorite color. And I had seen this car in Switzerland, and I joked to a friend, I said, if you, even though I don't like black, if you want to get me a nice Christmas present, you could get me that BMW sports car. It was a convertible, you know, no top on it. It looked like it was going 80 miles an hour. It just parked there. And it was about, you know, one of these cars is $75,000 or something. So I'm walking down the street, and this black BMW sports car comes up the middle of the street, and it's Swami driving the car. Now this is like probably 6 months after he left the body. And he looked like when he was 35 or something, you know, completely vibrant. His hair was full. And the funny thing, he was wearing a black leather jacket. And he also had on black sunglasses, like he looked like a rock star, you know. Again, he looked like Michael Jackson or something like this. And he drove very slowly, and the engine didn't make any sound at all. And there was no exhaust fumes that came out of the back, but I could hear the tires rolling on the cement. And I was so shocked, I didn't get out of I was in the middle of the road, right on the yellow line. I didn't move. And he drove very slowly, just maybe 6 inches from my leg. And he gave me this pose, you know, what is it, "Have no fear when I am here," you know? I forgot what the name is, Abhasya, something. Why fear? That's, sometimes he would say, "Why fear when I am here?" Sai Baba would say that, and he would wave like that. So he flashed this smile that was so beautiful, and this love hit me, you know. And I turned around to watch the car go, and that's when I saw there was no exhaust, no sound from the engine. Well, there's no other way to get out of that subdivision except the way you come in, you know. And I knew there was no other Swami devotees there. But I said, who could he be visiting, you know? I want to see where he's going. So I followed the car, and it went around the bend, and there's a dead end. There's a gate. You can't get out there. And you know, there's people with their cars in the driveway. The car had just disappeared into thin air, you know. So I just thought that's, you know, you shouldn't think that, oh, Swami's left his body, he's not here anymore, because that was definitely very tangibly showing me that he was still here. And, you know, Jesus said, where 2 or more are gathered in my name, I am there. And I think that applies to all spiritual teaching, that when 2 people get together and want to share the spirit, that God is there. So I feel that very much here with this group, you know, that when we talk about Swami or talk about God, talk about Jesus, that it invokes that presence, you know, in us. That's why this, you know, satsang is very important, to share that. Yes, yeah.
May I ask a question? You said that you were born and raised in New York. Why move to Mount Shasta? What made you move there?
She asked why I moved to Mount Shasta. I was actually born in Florida, but I grew up in New York. Okay, I went to the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, and it was, you know, very stressful being there. didn't have the things as a American. I was used to the feather pillow and all that kind of thing. So I went back to the house where I was staying, and there was another American there, and he had traveled quite a bit also. And I said, I wish there was some place in America. Also, my visa was about to expire, I said, I wish there was some place in America that had the same vibration as the Himalayas, And he said, well, there is one place. And I said, where is that? He said, Mount Shasta. He said, if you go high up on the mountain and pray and meditate up there, you can have the same energy and you can have the darshan of the saints there. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And then in that week, 2 other people told me you should go to Mount Shasta. So that was very interesting. Oh, and then after that experience with Neem Karoli Baba, where he said, Jesus is your guru, the very next day I was walking down the street in Nainital, and someone came up to me. It might have even been Neem Karoli Baba in a different body. And he said, what are you doing in India? You have Jesus. And so I kept getting this message. Supposed to go back to America. I was thinking actually of taking sannyas, and I heard that India would let you, an American, do that, but you had to surrender your passport. And once you gave that up, you could never do that again. So it was a lifetime commitment, And then, I was still very sick at that point, so it was a choice between taking sannyas or leaving my body there in the Himalayas. And Neem Karoli Baba came to me in a dream. I was staying at a hotel in Nainital that belonged to one of his devotees. And he said, please don't leave your body in this hotel. You have no idea the paperwork in India. That if you die here, my devotees are going to have to spend months filling out all the papers and dealing with all the formalities. So if you're going to do it, go back to New York and do it. So anyway, so I went back to New York, and then was in my mind these people telling me about Mount Shasta. So I went up on the mountain and I fasted for 5 days, and I had heard that there was it's like I guess in India you call them mahasiddhas. The beings no longer in the physical body, like Babaji, that can appear when and where they want, and that they're guiding humanity from a higher world, So I was hoping to meet one of them, and of course, the one that's best known is Saint Germain. Now, the Theosophical Society, which I stayed in Adyar, I was a guest of the Theosophical Society for a while, so I read about them there. And so I was camped on Mount Shasta, and I was fasting, and on the morning of the 5th day, I woke up and there was somebody talking to me, and but I couldn't see anybody. I looked around, and it was the sun hadn't come up yet, but it was just becoming light. And whoever this was knew everything about me, knew about my childhood, knew I'd been in India, and then he started to tell me the future. And he said, you're going back to India to meet the Avatar. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not going back to India. And then he said, you're going to move to Mount Shasta, to this town. And then there were very few spiritual people there. It was a logging town with what we call like redneck people that just work cutting down the trees, And I said, I don't want to live here. And so he said, well, you're going to, and you're going to sell your farm. I didn't like anything he said. Then the last thing he said was, I want you to change your last name to the name of the mountain. And I said, that's ridiculous. I had, a lot of friends that took Indian names, like Ram Das, Krishna Das, all these Dases, And I thought it's silly for an American to take an Indian name. So I was definitely not, if I didn't succumb to getting an Indian name from Neem Karoli Baba, why should I listen to this guy? And plus, Shasta, it seemed like strange name to take, although nobody really knows where the name Shasta comes from, because it's a Sanskrit word. The Shastras are the teachings, the sacred teachings, and a Shastri is someone teaches the teachings, and supposedly a Shasta is someone tries to live according to the teachings. So I think of myself, I'm trying to live according to the Sanatana Dharma, so it's appropriate he would give me that name. And so, I went back to India, as he said, and eventually came back from Mount Shasta, and then people were calling me that. So the very funny thing is when I guess it was the second time I went to see Swami, I rented a house in Katagodi, which is in Whitefield, and there was a big racket going on. There was some celebration where they were blowing a trumpet and beating drums, and chanting. And so I went to see, they were right outside my house. So I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're celebrating the arrival of Shasta." And I said, "I'm Shasta." And they said, "No, it's Murga, or what's the other, he has like 4 names. Ayapam, and so you're supposed to go to this temple down south, but anyway, they were celebrating right there in Katagodi. So I thought that was Swami's sense of humor. So, but I think, again, Swami shows me all the time that he's still very much present, and that wherever you are, he is, and don't think you need to try really hard to get to him, that he's as close to you as your own heart, really. An interesting thing is, his teachings, there was a lady who lived in Mount Shasta who became my teacher. This Master Saint Germain that spoke to me, I later met in a physical body. He materialized in front of me. This story is in my book, Apprentice to the Masters. And anyway, he told me to go see this lady Pearl. And when I went to see Swami, it was right around Christmas, and they performed a play. The children in the school performed a play about the life of Jesus. And that play was written by my wife at the time, that she took the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus and put this in a play form. And before the play started, the students were going up taking Padma Namaskar from Swami, and he kept pushing them away, saying, "The same presence is in me is in you." He said, "Yes, I am God, but you are God also." And he said, "What your attention is on is what you become. So keep your attention on God throughout the day, and you will become God. And the way to do that is to say, I am the presence of God." And to keep saying that, I am the presence of God. It's really, in Sanskrit, you would say, Aham Brahmasmi, something like that, right? So this was the word for word. I was dumbfounded, because this is what Pearl was teaching. Those were actually her same words. And I think all the great teachers will say that when you do these mantras, whether you do them in Sanskrit or you do them in English, it's reminding you who you are. Like, you can say Shanti, or you can say, I am peace. And when you say that, it creates it, it brings it through. Or you can say, I am love. Or I am the presence of the living light. And that's like the teachings of Jesus. This is what there's so many sayings of Jesus where he says, I am the light of the world. So those sayings are meant for us to use. He didn't really intend for us to worship him personally, but he wanted us to feel it, that we are all Christ. He said, "Know you not, the kingdom of heaven is within you." You know, so a lot of those statements that Jesus said are the same as some of the Sanskrit mantras. It doesn't matter what language you say them in, but when you say them in your native language, I think it's more powerful. So just to remind yourself, that's the purpose of these mantras. Remind yourself who you really are, that you have all these divine qualities within you, you know, that you can call them forth. So I'll just give you a little funny story about this Master Saint Germain. He's another one of these, all these people are connected, you know, it's not like some Western masters and Eastern masters. Once you get up to that level, out of the body, it's all one big family up there. So I was writing one of my books, and I wanted to convert the footnotes at the bottom of the page into endnotes to have them at the end of the book. Then I realized I made a mistake. This publisher wanted them back to be footnotes. But I couldn't convert them back, and it damaged the formatting of the book somehow. And I spent hours trying to correct it. And I couldn't do anything with it. And I said, that's it, I'm not going to publish this book. So I told Saint Germain, I had a picture of him up there, and I said, that's it, I'm finished with this book. So I went to bed. In the morning, I heard him say, turn on your computer. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And I used Microsoft Word. That's like the program that all the professional writers use, you know. It's very complicated. I mean, I know friends have been using it for 10 years and they still don't know all of the little intricacies of it. So it had just completely frozen. And so he kept saying, turn on your computer. And I said, I don't want to look at that again. So, but I learned to listen to what he says. So I turned on the computer and I opened the document, and all the footnotes have been converted back, the endnotes converted back to footnotes. Everything was working perfectly. And I looked at him, I looked at his picture on the wall, and he winked at me. And he said, I know Word. So you think these spiritual beings, you know, that they're very abstract, that they don't know mundane things, but they can do anything. They can help you with your programming, or, you know, your computer or your car or whatever. So, and they have a great sense of humor, you know. So, yes, in the back.
Hi, thank you for coming. I have a question. Do you know anything about the teachings of the new book that was supposed to be in in Russia? And I think Seva, I think in one of the videos, he manifested a small book. And he said, these are the new teachings of Jesus that will have all the faith and all the religions. And it was a little book that get manifested. Do you know anything about that?
When did that happen?
Sometime in 1990s.
Yeah,
Swami, in the middle of the discourse, he actually manifested a very small book. That's what she's talking about. And he said that this is the essence of all the religions are in this book. And this book is in a Russian museum right now.
Oh.
And then he said every religion that has ever existed in humanity is in this book. And he showed it to everybody. And then it disappeared after he. So what's the question, dear?
So I was wondering if you knew
Oh, if
anything
you-
else.
I don't know about it. I'll tell you another funny story. Do you know the actor Steven Seagal? He's a martial arts actor. He's very close now to Vladimir Putin, but I met him in Mexico a long time ago, and he said, you're my long-lost brother. We became very, very close, you know? And then he was recognized as this Buddhist tulku. He wanted to get out of the movie business, so he went to Bali, and he was walking down the beach, and he called me from Bali, and he said, I don't know what to do with my life anymore. I feel completely lost. I don't want to make these movies anymore. And I said, you should go on a vision quest. And he said, what's that? You know, and I said, well, you have to go alone and go seek God, you know, wander, go someplace. He said, where should I go? I said, why don't you go to India? And he said, would you come with me? And I said, well, it's not a vision quest if I go with you, you know. And he kind of begged me, he said, I'll pay your way, you know, And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And so eventually, and he said, well, where should I go in India? I said, go see Sai Baba. So he actually did that. He got someone to go with him. And Baba treated him very kindly. Now, you may not know it, he acts like the tough guy, but he actually has very low self-esteem. I mean, sometimes people act a role because they're trying to cover up that they have some inadequacy inside, So Swami treated him very kindly, had him, when Swami was on stage, he had Stephen sitting in a chair next to him, And Stephen was confused. He really had not studied Hinduism. He didn't know what was going on. And there were mobs of Indian people, young people, wanting his autograph, Not Swami's autograph, they wanted his autograph. And he was afraid they surrounded his car and were rocking the car back, and he thought he was gonna die. He said he was really scared. But Swami gave him, an audience one day, and he precipitated an emerald ring for him, a huge emerald ring, and gave it to him. And everyone was shocked because Swami they said that ring used to belong to Rama, and Swami had precipitated it years before, passed it around, showed everyone, then put it back into the ethers, and he gave that ring to Stephen. And and then Swami kept saying to him, you're a good man, And of course, when we see what the newspapers report about someone, it's very easy to judge them, or we see the roles they play in the movies, we come up with other judgments, but we really don't know who these people are inside, what they need. But Stephen was very touched, and I was very touched when he told me that Swami kept holding his hand and saying, you're a good man, And so anyway, I think our time is probably about up. It's about 4:30. Yes, yeah.
So how does your daily sadhana look like? What do you do every throughout the day?
I wait for Shekhar to call me, and he tells me what the next thing I'm supposed to do. It varies, I was sometimes get up early in the morning, and now I'm in this. I'm taking these like cold showers early in the morning. Then I feel really energized, and I do try to meditate early in the morning. And then I'm feeling the pull to go back to writing. So writing is really a sadhana for me. And when you're writing about something, then you really experience it inwardly, So I'm also trying to do things, to stay in the body, like I do qigong exercises, things like this. Things like, one time I did a lot of hatha yoga, but now I do other kind of exercises to bring the spirit into the body, because it's very easy if you do a lot of intense sadhana where it's much easier to stay out of the body or to merge in the light, but it's, sometimes you need things like keep you in the body, like have a wife, children, things like this, That's good sadhana. Reminds you, to be, actually being a householder is one of the real high sadhanas, I think, And it's very easy, like if you're a yogi, you live in a cave, to feel like you're enlightened and you have nothing else to learn. But, try raising a family, then you realize there's a lot more to learn,
Come to Sai Center.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Ramdas used to say, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your family. Because they're going to find some button to push someplace. And that's where the real growth is. It's looking at those things. Yes.
Feeling about why there's so much right now, so much despair and unhappiness in the world. You have your own personal.
Well, very interesting. I study astrology a bit, and of course, there are many different types of astrology. There's Chinese, there's Jyotish, the Western astrology. Over the last 2 months, Mars has been in Pisces, which is a sign of kind of stress and anxiety, and that changes on January 1st. So I'm hoping everything will lighten up January 1st. But again, just remind yourself that this is all God's dream, and everything has its place. So to try to feel, even at the darkest moment, that there is the light in you. That you are God, and to not dwell on the illusion of the negative things, but to dwell on the positive. It's so easy with the internet, all the social media, to get pulled into this story about bad things. But it's very important. That's where this sadhana comes in, and doing this practice and the meditation, where you put your attention on the good, on the light within you, and that's how you bring in the new age. So well, I'd like to thank you all, and it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.